So, for some people, they don't know what state to file their divorce in. Maybe they've recently moved to Connecticut from out of state. Maybe they live in one state and their spouse lives in Connecticut. This question comes up a lot. What's the right state? I know I want a divorce, but where should I file it? There are 3 ways that someone can meet the residency requirement in order to have a Connecticut divorce. The first way is by far the most common. And what that way says is that one or both spouses, but you just at least need one, has lived in Connecticut for the 12 months preceding the filing or the finalization of their divorce. So, you know what that means, right? Before I file my divorce, I've lived here at least 12 months. Super clear. What about the second part of that? 12 months before my divorce comes final. Well, how do I know how long it will take for my divorce to be final? This is a question we answer a lot. People move to Connecticut, they know that they want a divorce, they've been here 5 or 6 months, and what they're wanting to know is, may I file in Connecticut now? We are happy to work through this with you, give you a sense of how long your divorce will take, because what matters most in this way of achieving residency in Connecticut for purposes of a divorce is when that divorce is likely to become final. That's the date that we need to make sure it was 12 months before that. We help people through this all the time. A less common way to achieve residency in Connecticut, it happens in a certain circumstance. It's when you lived in Connecticut at the time that you married, and then you moved away, and then you moved back to Connecticut, and you intend to live here permanently. So let's say 20 years ago, you got married in Connecticut where you lived. Then you moved for a while to New York. Your marriage started to break down. Things weren't going well. You decided to relocate to Connecticut. You came back here to Connecticut intending to live here permanently. If that's the case, you meet the Connecticut residency requirement. You don't have to have lived here a new 12 months because you lived here when you got married, you left, and you returned intending to reside here permanently. The third, and I would say the least common way to achieve residency in Connecticut for purposes of a divorce is when the marriage broke down after you moved to Connecticut. That doesn't say that you need to be here 12 months before the divorce is final. All that requirement is that the marriage broke down after you moved to Connecticut. So it seems easy at first blush, right? So why is it so uncommon? It's so uncommon because it is so hard to prove exactly when a marriage broke down that it, generally speaking, doesn't make sense to go down this route. Most people wind up going with the most common way to achieve residency in Connecticut, which requires that you lived here at a minimum 12 months before your divorce becomes final. Most of our divorces here at Freed Marcroft take about 9 to 12 months. That's what we see generally happening in Connecticut. So most people are going to qualify under the most common way to achieve residency, which is that you lived in Connecticut for 12 months continuously before your divorce became final. When you're trying to figure out whether or not Connecticut is the place where you can get divorced, you might think, what is my domicile? It's a legal term that comes up in the context of establishing residency. There are things that courts look to decide what your domicile is. Maybe you own property in multiple states, so it's unclear where you're a permanent resident of. Some of the things that we would look to are, where do you consider your home? Where's your driver's license? Where do you vote? Things that signify that you live in a certain place. How many days of the year do you spend in a place? Do you spend 190 days in one place and less time in another? How does all of that shake out? So it's one of the things that courts would look at multiple factors to figure out what your true domicile is. But remember, in Connecticut, only one of the two spouses needs to meet the residency requirement in order to qualify for a Connecticut court to hear your divorce. One thing that happens to a lot of people is they think that the rule is that they have to live in Connecticut for 12 months before they file their divorce. I think it's really important to know that you have to live in Connecticut for 12 months if you're using that route to establishing residency. You have to live in Connecticut for 12 months before your divorce is final. So if you have a question of whether or not you are eligible to file in Connecticut and you'd like to start getting the process moving, I want you to give us a call to work through these issues early. A lot of times we're finding that people think they have to wait longer than they actually have to wait to begin moving forward.